This was a 20-year war. It was started by President Bush. You remember President Bush? I know many of you have disowned him because he disagrees with President Trump. You don't want to examine 20 years. You only want to examine, like, the last week. President Trump invited the Taliban to Camp David around the anniversary of 9/11. What?
Spearheading the wave of Democrats unapologetically taking no shite, sorry mum for swearing, from Republicans these days is Florida's Jared Moskowitz.
You know, they thought it was more important to talk about the DC government and public urination before the Afghan withdrawal. And so
he found a place in my heart alongside Jamie Raskin when he came for QAnon Karen herself.
President Trump's Executive Order EO 13957 removed many job protections for poorly performing or insubordinate officials in important federal jobs.
You know, we heard that we should go back to Trump's hiring procedures. You know, I'm not the only one who thought the hiring procedures from the Trump administration were pretty bad. I mean, one of Trump's own allies just said a couple weeks ago that he loves President Trump, but his HR was horrible. In fact, quite frankly, it's President Trump himself that says, quite frankly, his hiring procedures were quite terrible. John Bolton, who worked in the Trump administration, Trump called him a wacko and a sick puppy. Jeff Sessions, who was hired by Donald Trump, was called mentally unqualified. John Kelly, who was hired by Donald Trump, Trump said he was way over his head. Rex Tillerson, who was hired by Donald Trump, he was dumb as a rock.
But today, while discussing the ever so polarizing subject of the Afghanistan withdrawal, something Republicans can want to erase 18 of the 20 years of, Moskowitz, well, he was on hand to provide some context and call out the hypocrisy of subpoena dodgers complaining about a lack of transparency.
Who says it's an important topic? You know, we're 100+ days into the next Congress. And this committee thought that before we would talk about the Afghanistan withdrawal, they thought it was more important to talk about Twitter first. And not only did they think it was more important than the Afghanistan withdrawal, they thought it was more important to talk about the hiring policies of the Biden administration. They also thought it was more important to talk about a laptop that was found at Radio Shack before the Afghan withdrawal. You know, they thought it was more important to talk about the DC government and public urination before the Afghan withdrawal. And so I know this is a serious topic, but just look at the hearings we've had before this one. And so it's tough for us on this side of the aisle to accept that this isn't a serious hearing. This was a 20-year war. It was started by President Bush. You remember President Bush? I know many of you have disowned him because he disagrees with President Trump. But 4 presidents, 20 years of good decisions, 20 years of bad decisions. You don't want to examine 20 years. You only want to examine, like, the last week. You know, when marriages dissolve after 20 years and they get in front of a judge, they don't just say, you know, everything was great until the last week of marriage. It's crazy. President Trump invited the Taliban to Camp David around the anniversary of 9/11. What? Like, are there any questions about that? Trump released 5,000 prisoners, many that included terrorists, 5,000 Taliban prisoners, many that included terrorists. I'm even hearing some of my colleagues say that they can't get information out of this administration. It's ironic when those same colleagues didn't comply with subpoenas, now complain they can't get information. That's the problem with this place. It's not serious. This is no different than COVID. You guys only wanted to talk about COVID under the Biden administration. COVID was a 3-year issue. And so I'll end with this, Mr. Chairman. It was accused that the Democrats don't want to quit Trump. We'll quit Trump when you quit Trump. We look forward in a bipartisan fashion, quitting Trump together. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Following up Moskowitz was Jamie Raskin, who was back today and used his time to double down on the decisions made by the prior administration to coddle the Taliban. Again, something they conveniently avoid discussing when the topic arises.
When we zero in on the final months of the war, my Republican colleagues refuse to examine the elephant on the battlefield, President Trump's disastrous decision to cut out the Afghan government and negotiate directly with the Taliban, and then to enter into a dangerously lopsided agreement with these authoritarian religious fanatics. In the Trump-Taliban agreement, or Doha agreement, Trump struck numerous bad deals and fateful bargains with the Taliban that would come back to haunt us, including the release of 5,000 Taliban fighters from prison, many of whom promptly rejoined the insurgents in their battle to recapture Kabul. Our colleagues have also conveniently ignored President Trump's decision just 4 days after Joe Biden was declared the winner of the presidential election to secretly order the withdrawal of all troops by January 15, 2021, a move that stunned his own military generals, in which Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, called, quote, odd, not standard, and potentially dangerous. After significant pushback, President Trump rescinded his secret order and replaced it with a directive to draw down to 2,500 troops. Months later, when President Trump begrudgingly left Washington under a cloud of bear mace and tear gas, he did so without providing the new administration any plans at all on how to safely withdraw the remaining U.S. troops or how to safely evacuate Americans and our Afghan allies within the strict timeline prescribed by Trump's Taliban agreement. This failure was not an accident, but was calculated to force Biden's hand. President Trump later bragged about this maneuver at a rally with his supporters, stating, I started the process. All the troops are coming back home. They could not stop the process. They wanted to, but it was very tough to stop the process. Trump moved forward with the withdrawal of U.S. troops even as the Taliban increased violent attacks against the Afghan government and refused to sever ties with terrorist groups, including the Haqqani Network and al-Qaeda.
The best part of waking up? MAGA Tears in my cup. Check out the new MAGA Tears mug available now at store.MeidasTouch.com. That's store.MeidasTouch.com. It's 100% union made right here in the USA. I know I'm not tired of winning yet. How about you? Get yours today.